Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Amjad Muhtasib, the Executive Director for the Mass Houston, and today we have Dr. Dalia Kasib.
Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Last time we spoke about the primaries, but today we're going to talk more about the primary in the different states, and also we're going to talk about the Super Tuesday, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct. It's nice to meet everyone. I'm excited to be able to present this to you guys today. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Okay, wonderful. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
So today, inshallah, we're going to do a state focus on the primary vote. Remember, we discussed initially the importance of why we should go out and vote in the primaries. Remember, our voices are amplified in the primary election. So I'm not even talking about November. I'm talking specifically about the primaries, which are coming up very shortly for all our communities throughout the United States. And so we need to make sure that we're voting in the primary elections. One thing that I had mentioned before that I want to mention today is that when we phone bank, when we march, when we protest, when we communicate with our state reps, our state senates, our U.S. Congress, U.S. Senates, we want to make sure that we are voters, that there's a voter check mark next to our name, so that when they see an email come through, that they're looking and identifying that we are voters and that they're taking these emails seriously. So this is a good way for us to identify ourselves as voters. So when we send out these emails, when we phone and we call these offices, when we go to marches, they know that we're going there and we are voters. And so we matter a little bit more than those that don't vote. And so we all matter, but it's just a little bit stronger when you are a voter. Now, the first thing we're talking about is some primary terminology. So I'll talk about open and closed primaries, and I'll explain to you what that means. And then number 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are the 4 swing states in the United States. So Michigan, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Number 6 is others, and those are positions of interest. And so within those states, there are positions that are swing positions, if you want to call it that. And so those are states that have kind of swing positions that can go either way. And that's Minnesota, Florida, Texas, New York, and California. And so remember, the first thing we said, we were going to talk about terminology within the primaries. And so there's quite a few different types of primaries, but I'm going to focus on 3 today. The first one is a closed primary. So when I talk about closed primaries, just think about it exactly like that. Okay. So within a closed primary, you have to identify yourself as a Democrat or as a Republican before you go to the ballots, before you go to the primary election. Remember, the primary elections are the only elections that are that you have to identify yourself as a Democrat or Republican. Independents are not on the ballot in the primaries. So if you are planning on voting as an independent, you will be voting in the November election. But in primaries, you have to identify yourself as either a Democrat or a Republican. In states that are considered closed primaries, you have to identify yourself as a Democrat or as a Republican prior to the election. Okay, that's really important. It's prior to the election. You cannot cross. Yes, sir.
So when you talk about the independent, so if they're gonna vote during the general election if they choose to vote for independent, for example, how would they be counted as they have voted in the primary if they cannot vote in the primary?
In closed states,
if the independence doesn't have a primary, how would they vote? So they're just gonna skip voting during the primary?
So it's really important that they identify themselves as a Democrat or as a Republican prior to election. Some states require a month before, some states require when you're registering to vote, you can change it afterwards. So every state is a little bit different. We see here 8 states that are closed primaries. And so anyone who's an independent, you see the little sad faces on the bottom in that picture, they are not allowed to vote in a primary. So they cannot vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. So that's why they're sad humans. So I recommend that independents either identify themselves as Democrats or Republicans so that they are able to vote in these states in their primaries.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have any questions regarding the slide? Is it clear, the information?
No, it's clear. So these are states that either you are a Democrat or you are Republican. And this is just exclusive for the members of the Democratic Party and members of the Republican Party.
That's correct, 100%.
Okay.
And so there's these other states, these are called partially closed primaries. Partially closed primaries are closed primaries in that if you are registered as a Democrat, you can only vote in the Democratic Party. And if you're registered as a Republican, you can only vote in the Republican Party. But independents have a smiley face because independents can go between primaries. So they can vote in the Democratic or in the Republican primaries. That's the major difference here in partially closed primaries. And you can see the states here that are partially closed. And so when you register to vote, if you identify yourself as a Democrat or as a Republican, then you can only vote in those primary elections for those candidates. If you are independent, you are the only one that is allowed to go between the different parties if you choose to vote in the primary election. The next one is called open primaries. Texas, for example, is an open primary. Some of our states that we're discussing, swing states like Georgia, is an open primary. Michigan is an open primary. So open primaries are exactly that. When you go to the ballots on election day or during early voting, you get to select if you're going to vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. So for example, say I was a Democrat and I voted in the Democratic Party 2 years ago in the primaries. Now, when I come to vote, when I come to vote in this Super Tuesday, March 5th election, I can personally choose if I want to vote in the Democratic primary or if I wanted to vote on the Republican primary. And it's the same thing. If 2 years ago I voted as a Republican, in this primary, I can choose if I'm a Democrat or Republican, and I can vote in that primary as well. And so that's why it's called open. Independents are free to go back and forth. Democrats are free to go back and forth. Republicans are free to go back and forth. And so you can see here in this picture, yellow and orange hats signify one primary versus another, Democrat versus, but you see mixed hats because you can vote wherever you want. And so let me give you a good example of this. I'm going to election day. And I'm walking into the ballot. I hand my ID to the staff there. They take my ID, they scan it, and then they flip a screen over. And that screen is going to say, do you want to vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary? And you select if you want to be classified as a Democrat or if you want to be classified as a Republican. Now, remember, there are no independent candidates in our primaries. The primaries are focused on Democrats and Republicans so that we can narrow down the pool and select the one person that's going to be on the November election within that particular party.
Okay, because we got sometimes we get some prominent candidates that they try to make a name for themselves during the primaries, but there is no place for them, especially like in the state like Texas. There is no place for them where somebody can vote for them because they are independent.
Exactly.
So, but if I am independent or I'm intending to vote independent, so in Texas, do I skip the primary?
So I personally recommend that you go to the primaries and you select whether you want to vote on the Democratic ticket or the Republican ticket, but you have to identify yourself as Democrat or Republican. When you want to, in the general elections, it's an open ballot. So in the general elections, you can vote for independents, you can vote for Democrats, you can vote for Republicans. So it's completely open to whatever you want to select. And so I recommend that independents, they register as Democrats or Republicans during the primary elections, and then they can vote independents in the general election if they choose to. Because in the general elections, remember, everything is open, it's open ballots. And so you don't have to choose a certain a group, let's say, party to vote in. And so you have, all your options. And so let's just take an example. Let's say I'm an independent and I'm going in to vote. Let's say I want to vote in the orange primaries. The first question that's going to pop up is the presidential nominees within the orange primary. Okay. If I was in the yellow primary, the first question that pull up is the presidential nominees within the yellow primaries. I, as an independent or as a regular voter, can choose to skip that if I don't like anyone on the ballot, or I can actually choose someone within that position. And so let's say the position had Mr. Smith, Mr. Jackson, and Miss Rice in the orange primaries. And let's say I liked Miss Rice, for example, then I can select her. Let's say I didn't like anyone in that orange primary ballot. I can just skip that and go to the next question. And so that's what I recommend for independents, going into the primary that they feel most comfortable voting in, and skipping any position that they're not comfortable putting a name next to it or check mark next to it.
Okay, well said. I guess just the primary is for either Republican or Democrat. And I don't know, how about the third party? Do they have primaries as well?
No, there's only really two primary elections, the Democratic primary and the Republican primary. Everyone else is considered independents.
Independent. Okay.
Okay. And so independent parties, whether we're talking about the Tea Party or any other party, those are all carried out in the general elections.
Okay.
So here is more state specific. So I just wanted to list them out one more time. So there's open primaries like Michigan, Virginia, Georgia, Minnesota, and Texas, and closed primaries, which is Pennsylvania, Florida, and New York. Now, California is a special one. It's called a top two primary. I'm not going to go into a lot of details there. I want you guys to research it. If you want to understand more about top two primaries, it's a little bit more confusing and a lot more information there. So please just Google top two primary in California and see what that comes up if you live in California.
Okay.
And so a really important concept for today is Super Tuesday. So Super Tuesday is where 1/3 of the country, almost 1/3 of the country votes. 16 states vote in these primaries. Now, we've discussed if these states have open or closed primaries or partially closed primaries, but we have not discussed the dates. And so the next slide, I'm going to show you in a very detailed slide the dates, but I really want to stress Super Tuesday, because Super Tuesday is where we know which candidates will really be selected in November. So this is where 1/3 of the country votes, and where we know that the majority of the vote is going to go for this presidential candidate versus another within their primaries. And so remember, there's two primaries, the Democratic primary and the Republican primary. And usually on Super Tuesday, we know who's going to be our candidate for the Democratic primaries, Democratic ticket, and who's going to be our candidates for the Republican ticket. In regards to presidential candidates, Senate candidates, U.S. Congress candidates, state Congress, state Senate candidates. So we have a very good picture on Super Tuesday, which is March 5th, as to what our expectations should be. You can also see on the right-hand side the voting rates in Super Tuesday. So we can see Minnesota, Virginia, and Maine vote at very high rates in the 70s. And we can see like places like Alabama, who's in this lower 60s, Oklahoma in the higher 50s, and Arkansas right in the mid 50s. And so you can see how many people are coming out for these Super Tuesdays. So remember, I said our voices are amplified if we go out and vote in the primaries. This is exactly why it's super important to vote in the primaries, because not everyone votes in the primaries, and we're able to make a huge impact if our numbers are increased within the primaries. And so on the left-hand side, you can see the closed primary states, the open partisan states, and the open partisan with nonpartisan regulation states. So those are this is kind of a map to show you the information that I just presented. Are there any questions on this slide?
So we look at the different states. So this is the percentage of the people
Yes, sir.
that they vote from the register. So yeah, it make a big difference of getting the Muslim votes out. That makes a difference
Of course.
that could upset certain candidates.
So remember in the first slide, we were talking about swing states. So swing states are very close in number. So a few hundred votes, a few thousand votes can actually swing the vote one way or another. So those are major states that make huge impacts when you vote in the primaries. There are also states, like we talked about, that have positions that are swing positions. And so, if we're talking about state Senate, or if we're talking about US Congress, there are certain positions that are kind of swing positions. They can go left or right. And so that's why it's so important for us to vote in the primaries, because we can actually select who will be representing us in the November elections within that party. So really, in general, and in conclusion, people who vote in the primaries are the ones that dictate who's going to be on your ballot in November. So people who do not vote in the primaries are just stuck with whatever is presented to you on the general ballot. And remember, in the general ballot, you only get one Democrat representation, one Republican representation within every position, and some of the positions will have independents. But you have no say in who that Democratic representative was or who that Republican representative was. In the primaries is where you decide if you want Mr. Smith, Mr. Jackson, or Ms. Rice to be your representative within that party. And that's the only time that you get to select who's going to represent you in that party, so that when you come to the general elections, you already have that selection made.
So yeah, so this is the key here. You don't want to wait. If you want to go make a difference, don't wait till the general election, because when the general election, you're going to select what is being chosen for you to select from. But in the primary, it's all open.
Yes, exactly. So the people who go to the primary elections are the ones that are selecting who's on your ballot in November.
Very good.
And so right now, we don't know who's on our ballot, but once March 5th, Super Tuesday arrives and we vote, we'll have a better idea of who's going to be on our ballot. And that is determined on Super Tuesday. So right now, we have no idea who's going to be on our ballot.
Okay. Very nice.
So the last thing, and on all these slides, you can see on the bottom the websites where I got the information from. So this last slide has a lot of information on it. It is the dates, the primary election dates by state and territory. So I pulled to the right some of the swing states and the interest states, the place of interest states. But on the left, I'm sorry, I pulled on the left. And on the right, you can see the screenshot of the different states and their presidential primaries and state primaries. And so this is just a very condensed slide with all that information, but you can also find it online.
Okay.
So I appreciate all your time in watching all these this video. I appreciate all your questions, and I look forward to making sure that our community are primary voters, because primary voters matter. And, I always have to say this towards the end: if we vote in the primary election, we matter more, and we can make more changes effective immediately than if we wait until November. If they see our numbers increase today in a month, then we can make a change in 2 months versus waiting until November to make those changes.
Yes. Now, if people want have more information, I guess they can contact you by email or by phone. They can call the 713-979-9009 or send to info@masshouston.org.
Yes, and please reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to answer any specific questions towards anything that you have. I'm also more than happy to address your community. If you need me to get on a phone call or a Zoom call, Teams call with your community members, so I can address and answer any questions that they may have, and explain to them why it's so important for us to go to these primary elections.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dalia, for sharing this valuable information. And really, this is the second, I guess, video we produce here. And there are a couple of more other videos we're going to be talking about, inshallah, next couple of weeks.
Inshallah.
The 5th in Texas is the last day to register for voting, right? In
Yes,
Texas.
sir. The 5th, February 5th is the last day to register to vote. That's correct.
And for those they want to vote in the Super Tuesday, also just check with your state. I think you had the list over earlier. You showed earlier the list on the different state, the last day of registration. Remember, don't wait till the last minute. It doesn't take much for you to register to vote. And for the leaders, you listen to this presentation. Please share it. It's gonna take exerted effort to try to pass this information and communicate this information to a lot of other the members of the community. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to the primary, and we're trying to clarify that for everybody, inshallah. Dr. Dalia, thank you very much again, and appreciate your time and effort. May Allah bless you and bless your time.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair.